Let's talk to Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff and former Senior Middle East Advisor at the Ministry of Defence, author of a book called The House of War, as well, the struggle between Christendom and the Caliphate. Good afternoon to you. Thank you for joining me.
Hi.
Again, with fingers crossed, it feels like some kind of ceasefire, some kind of deal is being reached. Of course, for many, it will be inadequate. It will feel inadequate to both sides, I guess, in some respects. That's the nature of negotiation. But what's your sense of it? What's your sense of how workable it is?
I think it is workable now, Sheila. I think the Biden administration have pushed very hard on this. Blinken's been involved for a long time. Trump coming in is really galvanized, of course, the hardliners in Israel and made it very clear to Hamas if there isn't a sort of deal, then America will continue to support Israel, probably through thick and thin. The whole situation, of course, in the region has changed dramatically. The emasculation of Hezbollah on Israel's northern border, the collapse of the Assad regime, and dare I say, the weakening, the huge weakening of the Iranian support for both Hamas, Hezbollah, etc. So I think, at a very human level, to stop the killing, get these hostages back, which sadly will include the bodies of hostages who have died in captivity, and hopefully have a decent political process of reconstruction, of humanitarian aid immediately in, of the regeneration of Gaza, of the engagement with the wider Arab world. There are a great many opportunities, but by goodness, we've had to go through some pretty bleak times since the 7th of October on this round, dare I say, of the sort of Israeli-Palestine confrontation that's been going on for decades.
Absolutely. I mean, the images coming out of the images of the day itself, October the 7th, which is never ended for the families involved, for the victims and survivors involved. That is a nightmare day on repeat, really, isn't it? Until their loved ones are home, one way or another.
400 plus days.
Yes, and then the bombardment of Gaza as well, and the human disaster that has become. Yeah.
And we simply don't know, and history will only tell, Sheila, is whether we can use this as an opportunity rather than rather than being a ceasefire, whether we can really build it into some lasting, durable settlement. The basic building blocks of which we've known really for decades. And it's just interesting, the whole context has changed in that region. And a generation has moved on of people, in Iraq has changed, Syria has changed, the Gulf states have changed, Egypt and Jordan have had a peace deal with Israel for many, many years. And in some ways, Hamas have unfortunately held the Palestinian people hostage, and then provoked this amazing, this very, very brutal, violent reaction by the Israeli state. But you have to say, what other option would there have been after the barbarism of the 7th of October? But there's sort of window of opportunity here, and hopefully some light, and hopefully this announcement you mentioned, Sheila, may make things clearer.
And there are two lenses, aren't there, to look at this through? You're right to say, let's hope there's cause for optimism. But what might dash that, a different lens to look at that through, is, the support for a two-state solution was never 100%. It was never a given, because if it was a given, it would probably have happened.
Not at all. Absolutely.
But you could argue, couldn't you, just to be more bleak for a moment, if I may, you could argue that the shock to Israel of October the 7th and the loss of their soldiers, of course, as well, since the hostage taking, you'll see in opinion polls, you'll see in elections, may have changed many Israeli minds about a two-state solution. Is it even possible that we would dare to try to live alongside these people in any normal sense? And ditto for the people of Gaza in particular, perhaps, not just Gaza, but perhaps in particular, they might look at what's happened to them and what's happened to their surroundings, their home, their families, and think there is no two-state solution here. You can hope that there could be, but that hope has been dashed in less brutal circumstances than this, hasn't it?
Certainly. There's so many false dawns. And in many ways, Sheila, of course, you go back to the optimism, perhaps, of the Oslo agreements, but that's nearly 30 years ago.
Yeah.
And the facts on the ground have changed, particularly in the West Bank, where there are so many settler buildings and dwellings now. But I was interested to see the Kuwaiti, a former foreign minister of Kuwait, saying we really in this region cannot advance on an idea that either the state of Israel is obliterated or the Palestinians don't get some sort of deal. And I think in many ways, the Abraham Accords have held up all the way through this. Countries like the UAE, countries like Bahrain have continued to hold that agreement with the Israelis. Of course, there was a hope early on that Saudi Arabia may come into this. The Arab world will be the people who provide sort of peacekeepers or supporters. They're the people who people will look for the funding for the reconstruction of Gaza. And it may be that we lance a boil. I think what happens to Netanyahu will be very interesting. He's supported, of course, because the Israelis feel very, very beleaguered and threatened. But equally, the failures of intelligence that allowed
his day of reckoning has to come, doesn't it? Politically, it has to come.
It does, and it really will. And a lot of people, the intelligence chiefs and maybe the senior figures in the IDF, let alone some of the hardliners with Netanyahu. So that's a very divided situation. Equally, if you look at what's going on in Lebanon, Sheila, there is a chance that those people can, on both sides of the border, the Lebanese can come south again into South Litani, and all the displaced Israelis may be able to move back into North Israel, and the removal of Assad regime in Syria. So this, one's always got to keep opening the sort of aperture in that part of the world, because the connectivity is so important. Just look at the fact it's all taking place in Qatar. We know the sort of, there's been a lot of support for Hamas, or certainly the Palestinians in Gaza from Qatar over the years.
Do you think that you'd mentioned at the beginning of our conversation the changes that have taken place in parts of the Middle East since October the 7th, not least because of the military response more recently in Lebanon, the changes in Syria, for example, the denigration of not just Hamas, but of Hezbollah as well, question marks over the Iranian regime. We're talking here about Islamism, aren't we? Political Islamism. Do you think if political Islamism is sufficiently defeated in the Middle East, that gives Palestinian people in Gaza and elsewhere a greater hope of a future, a better future?
I personally would say this. I feel, I absolutely acknowledge the horrors that the people in Gaza have gone through. But equally, I do feel, and I know, because one's watched it closely, and tried to be as even-handed as possible, that Hamas were absolutely prepared to use the Palestinian people as a battering ram to achieve, inspired or provoked or supported certainly by Iran, the Palestinian people, knowing there was going to be reprisal, and then fought very much among the people in a way that's made it very difficult for the IDF, however restrained they would like to be or would want to be, and we can all have a debate about that. But it did mean we were going to end up with more casualties, and holding the hostages, and that deal's been on the table for a while, for as long as they have. I mean, the reality is, of course, if I was a Hamas leader at the moment, trying to look at the ceasefire, I would look at the Israeli track record of hunting down people who have attacked that state, and I look back to the film Munich. And I said right at the outset of this, these people are dead men walking. Most of them are dead now, and the middle leadership. And but blood begets blood, and there's an awful lot of families who will carry that blood debt. And I don't know quite whether this is bloodletting that's going to lead to something good, or just another generation and another round. But by goodness, everybody, one might hope something good can be something from this
so the whole
in the
thing
next year. I'm not saying tomorrow.
No, it'll be a process, won't it? But the whole thing is appalling. As a former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff, you will know a thing or two about leadership and its importance. I was listening to a podcast the other day reflecting on Jimmy Carter's time, the Camp David Accords, and his subsequent interest and perhaps shift on that subject of Israel and Palestine. And I heard a former advisor of his say something very true. He recounted a conversation he'd had with Jimmy Carter when Jimmy Carter, beyond a presidency, was seeking to do more. And he said, listen, you achieved the Camp David Accords with Egypt's Sadat and Menachem Begin of Israel at the time because they were leaders and they were men who were able to look over the horizon for their people and for their country. You do not have that now. Now, he was talking about, 20, 25, 30 years ago.
Yes.
You really don't have that now, do you, in the form of Hamas or the Iranian regime or indeed Netanyahu? You don't have the same caliber of leader.
No, I think you're right. And as we say, the facts on the ground have changed, Sheila. It was very bold. And let's be honest, Sadat paid for that boldness with his life.
He did.
It's a very dangerous business and an offshoot of the
And
Muslim
Arafat pulled out of the Oslo Accords for fear of his
And
own.
Tragically, Arafat pulled out because there were too many other agendas running there. And that old cry, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity. And it is a tragedy. And some people sustain their leadership by making concessions. Some sustain their leadership by not making concessions. Many of the leadership in Israel always want to negotiate from strength. Sadly, people like Netanyahu want to be strong in order not to negotiate. And I do feel the Israelis, if I was an Israeli, I would not want to think that my children and grandchildren were going to be condemned to this permanent standoff with the overall Muslim world, the Arab world, with the Palestinians. And one can only hope that there is some leadership on both sides that says, corralled, natured by the Turks, the Egyptians, Gulf Arabs, the Americans, the EU, that can say, really, we cannot all be held hostage. And I think it's terrific that Iran has been so badly weakened by the series of events at the end of last year, because they have used the Palestinians as they used the Lebanese people, as they've used the Yemeni people as a sort of strategic depth, as they use the Syrians.
As a weapon against the West.
As a weapon, and to give themselves strategic depth. And of course, it was very interesting. They were the biggest backers of the Palestinians, even though the Palestinians are Sunni Arabs. And of course, the Iranians are Shia Persians.
You mentioned the Turks there, and we haven't really touched on Turkey. If we can, just briefly before I finish, their role in this is going to be interesting. It's already interesting and contentious in Syria, but it's going to be interesting in this as well, isn't it? Beyond this deal, if it comes.
They could be. I mean, the Turks could be. The Turks are the great winners in Syria, without doubt. Iran's the great loser. Turks. Never underestimate the Turks, be it the Balkans, the Black Sea, the Caucasus, and the Middle East. Turkey has an interest. It's deeply embedded in what's going on in Libya. It has traditionally supported the Muslim Brotherhood, and in that it has an alignment with Qatar and the Palestinians. They're very proud people, the Turks, and they will want to have some say. But a Turkey that is looking to be a positive influence would be really, really helpful. And reaching out to Erdogan and making him, I don't mean this patronizingly, understand the benefits of a solution, more stability on the southern flank, getting all those refugees back into Syria, getting them out of Lebanon, getting them out of Jordan. They add to fragility these migration, large bodies of refugees.
Millions and millions, yeah.
Millions and millions, and all of them with families and displaced young children and education.
Places they want to go back to in Syria, having spoken to many.
All these things, very, very well. So, as I say, every crisis is a mixture of danger and opportunity. And let us just hope to goodness, people of good faith might be able to pick something out of this.
Thank you very much indeed for joining me today, Lieutenant General Sir Simon Mayall, former Deputy Chief of the Defence Staff, so former Senior Middle East Advisor at the MOD.